What's going on, guys? This is Star, and oh my god, what is happening with the video games industry right now? The last 2 weeks have been a roller coaster of announcements. There's actually been a lot of Star Wars video game news to go over, some of which kinda slipped under the radar. This video is going to be a massive review of everything we've learned recently, so do me a favor, hit that like button. It really helps to push my content out into the algorithm. But let's jump right in because there's a lot. I went into this video ready to say that EA is the reason that God invented the middle finger. But at this point, I think that bird needs to be directed at AAA gaming as a whole. We're seeing mass layoffs across the board, and it's affecting the gaming sphere in pretty much every way. And now even Electronic Arts has laid off almost 700 employees across their studios. The video game industry is shifting rapidly, my friends, and I think it has something to do with how popular these newer titles like Palworld and Helldivers 2 have become. These games are shining a huge spotlight on how far the industry has fallen. They're showing these massive publishers that the current business model is hot garbage. It's not consumer friendly, and people are sick of paying top dollar for a mediocre gaming experience. And can you blame them? Especially when you can pick up a game like Helldivers 2 for almost half of what you would pay for a modern AAA game. You can't beat that, especially when the gameplay is actually fun. That brings us to Star Wars, and the biggest bit of news right now, I think, is that with EA laying off almost 700 people, Respawn Entertainment is no longer working on that Mandalorian first-person shooter that was leaked just the other week. EA has flat out canceled that game. A Mandalorian game might be a few years too late anyway, but it doesn't help the fact that this got canned, and you can just add this to the ever-growing list of canceled Star Wars games under EA. In fact, let's rapid-fire name them off.
Ready? Go!
Project Yuma, Project Ragtag, Project Orca, Project Viking, and now the Mando first-person shooter were all canceled Star Wars games under EA, meaning that that company has canceled just as many games as they've released. And you want to know the best part? Check out these features that the Mando game was going to have. According to Tom Henderson with Insider Gaming, the game was set to be based on a Mandalorian bounty hunter, not Din Djarin, that would see the player search for bounties across the galaxy. The game started with The Den, which was the player's base of operations that contained your ship, a map of the galaxy, an upgrade station, an armory, and more. It's understood that it would be here where you would select which bounties you want to pursue. The player could then equip the weapons that they wanted, upgrade their armor, and then go into the ship and land on the planet where the bounty is located. The game was not an open world, and instead offered a linear level experience, but it did have some larger open areas for the player to explore and find their bounties and other secrets. Combat was described as very fast-paced due to the Mandalorian jetpack, which allowed for vertical dashing and horizontal boosting for reaching those high-to-reach places. It was also said that there was a takedown feature, which would see your character perform takedowns, somewhat reminiscent of Doom. The main enemies were stormtroopers, who would patrol most maps as you try to complete your bounty, and there were several different types that you would come to expect from a Star Wars game: regular, shotgun, sniper, heavy, and more. It's also understood that the game featured boss-like enemies periodically, which would see you face AT-ST walkers. Other enemies would depend on the planet you were on, but could range from gangs of outlaws to other bounty hunters who wanted to beat you to the punch. It's believed that the game was still a ways off from its release, but it's understood that the game had a fairly polished vertical slice and a few other missions and levels near completion. The game was in development for the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. You know, it's almost like EA is allergic to money or something. I can't think of a single person who's a fan of Star Wars who would say no to any of that. EA's CEO, Andrew Wilson, said in the same statement where he announced the layoffs, "We are sunsetting games and moving away from development of future licensed IP that we do not believe will be successful in our changing industry." Those words right there, changing industry, is what makes me think these CEOs are panicking about the new gaming trends like Helldivers and Palworld. He continues, "This greater focus allows us to drive creativity, accelerate innovation, and double down on our biggest opportunities, including our own owned IP, sports, and massive online communities." So he's basically saying that he doesn't think Star Wars or other licensed IPs will be successful, and they want to focus on their in-house games like Apex Legends, Battlefield, and sports. EA and Respawn is still working on Jedi 3 though, so at least that franchise is safe, and it's clearly because of how successful it's been. It's probably the one Star Wars project under EA that hasn't seen massive controversy. And from what I can tell, they want to make that series a trilogy, so Jedi 3 may or may not be the final installment of Jedi. The Mando game getting canceled is really depressing, but there's actually a lot of good news to balance it out, believe it or not. This really slipped under the radar, but the actor who plays Jar Jar Binks in the prequels, Ahmed Best, posted to his Instagram account a picture of himself in full motion capture equipment with this caption, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in," with a number of hashtags like Jar Jar Binks, Keller and Beck, and Activision, which is what's really interesting about all of this. As far as we know, Activision is not working on any kind of Star Wars game. And to be fair, we don't know if Ahmed here is playing either Jar Jar or Keller and Beck, who was his Mandalorian character. I would assume it's not Jar Jar because if you look at where the dots on his face are, it's obviously set up to capture his facial expressions and mouth movements. To me, it's more likely he's playing Keller and Beck here, which would also check out when it comes to Disney. They would much rather ignore George Lucas's Star Wars and anything that came from that so they can instead push out the new stories and characters. So if Ahmed is playing anybody here, it would most likely be Kelleran. There's also the fact Kelleran was recently added to Galaxy of Heroes a few months ago, so it wouldn't surprise me if they're giving Ahmed more time in that role. We'll have to wait and see, but what do you think this project might be? It might not even be Star Wars related. I wouldn't be surprised if Call of Duty is just throwing poodoo at a wall and maybe trying to do a Star Wars crossover. They've done a lot of weird collaborations lately with things like The Boys and Nicki Minaj. So maybe they're putting in a Jedi in Warzone. Who knows? That might actually be the one thing that'll make me reinstall COD, so we'll see. Next up, we've got some confirmation from Jason Schreier over at Bloomberg that the KOTOR remake is in fact still being worked on, but that comes with the caveat that we don't know if it will ever actually come out, because those are two different things. The developer Saber Interactive is in the process of separating from their parent company, the Embracer Group, in a $500 million deal. A group of private investors is allegedly trying to buy Saber, and as far as I can tell, this is only a good thing for the devs. Embracer is another one of those companies who's been gaining more and more negative press with their business practices, and they too have been slowly revolving employees out, laying off almost 1,400 people since June. I have a feeling that if this deal goes through and Saber does officially separate from Embracer, then the chances of the KOTOR remake coming out will drastically go up, so fingers crossed they can get that done. In more good news, the Battlefront Classic Collection was announced last week, and it's made YouTube feel just like the good old days when Battlefront 2 was at an all-time high. I've already covered everything in that collection in previous videos. It's less than 2 weeks out as of making this one, so that will help take our minds off the canceled Mando game at least. And a quick update on the Classic Collection. There was a spat of controversy around Aspire Media allegedly using a fan-made mod in the Battlefront re-release. They've since come out and corrected that rumor, saying that the footage that was captured for the trailer was just placeholder footage that somehow ended up making the final cut. The DLC heroes that this mod affected will be the actual characters from the game, and not from the mod, so that transparency is really appreciated. There's also the remaster of Dark Forces, which just dropped the other day, and I've seen a lot of good things about it online. The graphics have been seriously updated, and it looks more like a modern game that embraces an old-school art style, instead of just an older game, you know? I also can't help but notice these price tags on the Classic Collection and Dark Forces, which are both coming in at just around $30 US. You might think that's a bit much for older games like this, and I don't necessarily disagree, but Palworld is a $30 game too, and Helldivers 2 is also embracing this lower price point of $40. These lower prices are part of the appeal. Why spend $70 on an incomplete, bug-ridden mess of a game when you can spend $30 and have guaranteed hours of fun? It's a no-brainer, and I think that's part of the quote-unquote changing industry that Andrew Wilson had mentioned. These AAA companies and games are getting completely priced out, and I know for a fact they're looking at that some type of way. I can only imagine the conversations being had in the meeting rooms about how much games need to cost versus the cost of making them. It's probably why EA is deciding to focus on in-house properties. They won't have to deal with the headaches or the costs that come with licensing, and they can have complete creative control over how the games are made. From that perspective, I actually kind of get it. But I still think they're the reason God invented the middle finger. I've never been silent when it comes to my opinion about this company, and especially their handling of Star Wars games. I've been highly critical of them, and I haven't always had nice things to say, but I was always honest. And hey, to their credit, they took it on the chin. They even made me a member of the EA Creator Network at one point, and flew me out to the Jedi Survivor event in LA, for which I am eternally grateful. But I'm still an independent thinker. Just because you wine and dine me doesn't mean you've bought my opinion. And if they do something that calls for criticism, I'll be the first one to call them out on it. Canceling the Mando game was a stupid decision. The fans would have eaten that up, but EA doesn't want to eat the costs that comes with it. I don't think it would be as big a deal if it weren't for all the other Star Wars games that EA has canceled over the years. This one just kind of feels like a final FU on the way out, since they've already lost the exclusivity deal. But hey, maybe Activision's picking up where EA left off. Whether that's a good or bad thing, you be the judge. But that is all I've got for today's video. This one was packed with news, guys. I hope you enjoyed the commentary. Don't forget to like the video if you did. Consider subscribing if you're new for more Star Wars video game content, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.